Last one. World War I to World War II. So World War I ends in 1919, and World War II begins. It begins in 1933, but we'll say 1933, and then we'll put in parentheses 41 because that's when we joined the war. Yeah. Oh. 33 is when Hitler comes to power. I'm sorry. 39 is what we should do. Now there's two major periods that which characterized by prosperity. So it's economic prosperity. All pro-business. I'm going to put PB, pro-business. And technology and culture. And culture changes. Technology and cultural changes. The other time period is going to be the Great Depression. Which essentially begins with the stock market crash in 1929. So we'll say the Great Depression really starts setting in 1930, but no, 1929 is the stock market collapse. And it's characterized by FDR, really, because he's going to become president in 1933, and the New Deal. It's going to be characterized by massive unemployment, and intense isolationism. There is still isolationism in the 1920s, however, it is real intense by the 1930s. I should probably say FDR and the expansion of government, the federal government specifically, and expansion of the role of the federal government. Let's read some stuff about the 1920s. So, during the Roaring Twenties, Congress, supported by the Republican presidents, raised the protective tariff to augment already big business profits many businesses were amassing. European countries retaliate with their own high tariffs, which stymie, that's a good word, S-T-Y-M-I-E, or stall or hinder or stop international trade. During this time period of the Roaring Twenties, farmers continued purchasing labor price plummet by the end of the 1920s.
Why did the other countries put up the tariffs? What did they do with this? They were.
Me, right? I'm a good country. And then all of a sudden, I tell you, hey, by the way, in order to sell your stuff at DC, I'm going to charge you $5 on tax you $5 on everything you sell in here. And I'm selling goods in your school. What are you likely to do? Yeah, you're going to tax my stuff. You're going to retaliate with a tax of your own to offset it. That's one of the reasons. The United States. So part of it is retaliation. Part of it is because they themselves had struggling economies, trying to rebound from World War I. See ya.
Bye, thank you.
Yep. Another theme. The great stock market crash of 1929 led to severe, prolonged depression that devastated the American economy and the American spirit. Hoover takes most of the blame for the early years of the Depression. Hoover takes most of the blame for the early years of the Depression. Let me read you a quick summary of the 1920s. The Republican governments of the 1920s carried out active pro-business policies while undermining much of the progressive legacy by neglect. The Washington Naval Conference indicated America's desire to withdraw from international involvements. Sky-high tariffs protected America's booming industry, but caused severe economic troubles elsewhere in the world. As the Harding scandals broke, remember Harding, these presidents are all Republicans, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. Harding scandals broke. The puritanical Calvin Coolidge replaced his morally easygoing predecessor. Feuding Democrats, progressives fell easily victims to the Republican prosperity. American demands for strict repayment of war debts created international economic difficulties. The stock market he failed to relieve national suffering, although he did make unprecedented efforts to revise the economy through federal assistance. Other things that are going on: cars, the advent of cars, popularity of cars, becoming widespread in. You have new cultural trends, flappers. Flappers were usually young, single women who were rejecting traditional roles and beliefs about women. They were throwing off, flappers were shedding or throwing off their femininity. Did I talk about this? I think we talked about this on the retreat days. Guys, did we talk about flappers on the retreat day? How flappers were not trying to necessarily, they were trying to shed off their femininity. They weren't embracing it. They were hair was short. They dressed and smoked cigarettes. Other technological changes. 1920s was the rise of the radio. Big time deal. Rise of the radio. And its impact on the home life. No, its impact on politics. Political campaigns were embracing the radio, and speeches were going on. Jazz music became popular. What else was going on in the 1920s? Oh, the Red Scare of the 19-teens. End of World War I onward. The first Red Scare. You had big waves of anti-immigrant, anti-communism, anything liberal, anything it's anti-modernism. You're rejecting the modern changes. Rise of the KKK during the 19-teens and the 1920s. Resisting some of these changes and liberal ideas. You also have a big pushback from conservatives during this time period on educational reforms, meaning like teaching evolution in schools was a huge hot topic debate during the 1920s. It's the Scopes monkey trial. Do you remember this? What else during the 1920s? You began to have a increasing gap between young and old people, very much so changed, very much so like today's you with iPhones and Twitter and your grandparents that are like, that Twitter, and talk about it and how bad it is and how it's the end of the world. What else? Prohibition, that's a big one. Do we know this? So this is. Do not try and say in an AP essay that under culture, the speakeasies, gang, the rise of the mafia, right? And what's it called? boot, couldn't think of the word, bootlegging alcohol, which Detroit was right at the center of. Detroit being in its close proximity to Windsor, big time. There used to be tunnels that were dug underground across the Detroit River between Windsor and Detroit, and they would ship alcohol illegally under there. And then in 1929, we have the rise of the stock market, right? The skyrocketing of the stock market in the 1920s, peaking in 1929 before it collapses. Is there anything else we missed about the 1920s? I think that's most of the stuff we covered. I got nothing else. In the 1930s, then, let's go to the Great Depression and read about this, statistic-wise. Yeah.
Didn't women get the right to vote in the
1920, yes. 1920 is the 19th Amendment. 1920 is the 19th Amendment. Women grant the right to vote. Yeah.
What was that saying again?
Oh, in come the senators with wine and women. Let me write that for you. In come the senators with wine and women. And it's 16, 17, 18, 19. In come the senators with wine and women. 16, 17, 18, 19. And that all relates to these amendments. First ever income tax, federal income tax, direct election of senators, prohibition of alcohol, women gaining the right to vote. And then the 20th Amendment relates to lame duck session, meaning presidents and Congress, men and women, take over in January. They change in January instead of March. 21st is the repeal of prohibition. All right, so here we go. First 100 days. I think that we should do all of Roosevelt's New Deal stuff on a different day, like all of the New Deal programs and all that stuff. But let me talk about general stuff with the Great Depression and FDR. First 100 days of Roosevelt. Historic and executive actions, laws being passed, and presidential actions that attempt to deal with the Great Depression and its ill effects. There are 15 major pieces of legislation passed in the first 100 days. That's big time. Other big things. The New Deal also brings about major lasting reforms. Major lasting reforms as Social Security, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates the stock markets, the Federal Deposit Insurance, the FDIC, which guarantees people's deposits in banks. The New Deal also the New Deal embodies a monumental increase in the size of the federal government. The New Deal embodies a monumental increase in the size of the federal government. The federal government is spending more money and becoming more involved in the economy and people's lives than it had ever been before. A dramatic change. You also have a shift in voting. Low-income workers begin voting for the Democratic Party, especially African Americans, begin the shift towards voting for the Democratic Party as opposed to the Republican Party of old days. So you have a shift in voting from African Americans from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. And lastly, Congress legislates isolationary policies or creates laws that continue embracing isolationism. So there's the Neutrality Acts, the first Neutrality Act, which tries to say if any war breaks out, there's certain restrictions that automatically go into place. Farmers, the last thing I'll say, the farming industry as a whole experiences major problems during the 1930s. This is the Dust Bowl. You have thousands of farmers that are losing their farms. You have, John, have you read Grapes of Wrath? Did you ever have to read Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath? No. The Grapes of Wrath book is about farmers in the Dust Bowl and how hard times are. And so, and industry is struggling, but farmers are also struggling during the Great Depression. I'd say that's about all the things I'll talk about. I do want to go over some of the New Deal, like break down the relief, reform, recovery, major acts in the New Deal, the CCC, the SEC, the NRA, the alphabet soup of industries, or of government agencies and programs and laws, Supreme Court stuff. All right. Any questions? You guys rock. Thank you for coming.